Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these very critical times. I'm Bill Kelly, your host. Good to have you with us today. Well, if you're one of the millions of people that are following the media frenzy south of the border, and you're demanding answers to the questions of, is Donald Trump on Jeffrey Epstein's list? Did Trump send a suggestive birthday card to Epstein? If you're demanding answers to these, you're being duped, because that's not the question we should be asking, and that's certainly not the question nor the subject that the American media should be focused on. You're being duped by the White House. And this is an age-old trick that Trump has mastered for so many years, and he's doing it again. And there's either a willing media that are doing this, or they're just so scared of him right now that they're simply being complicit in this. It's the art of distraction. As a matter of fact, we've dubbed this, and as he's done this in past episodes whenever the heat is on Trump, these are weapons of mass distraction that seem to be part of the character of the Trump White House. And he's going through this again. The issue here is not about Epstein. We know, did Trump, partake in the crazy things that went on in Epstein on his little private island? Of course he did. We have photographic proof of it. This is a non-issue. The fact that he's denying it is inconsequential, except for the millions of people in the Trump cult, in the MAGA cult, that will simply believe anything that he says. The more important issue here is the manipulation of the media, and maybe, sadly, the capitulation of the American media to Trump's will, and for him to try to mold exactly what this message is going to be by either complicity within the media or fear, as we talked about just a couple of seconds ago. And this has happened before, and it's happening now. The problem here is that the checks and balances that were in place before don't seem to be there. They eroded or totally disappeared. The latest example of that is Epstein. The issue is to do with the Epstein issue, of course. It has to do with Trump basically suing anybody who says anything defamatory against him. And the latest, of course, is the Wall Street Journal. They're the ones that published the cartoon drawing that they say was drawn and written by Trump about Epstein's 50th birthday. And you've seen the quotes and you've seen the pictures, I'm sure. We don't need to get into the graphic details of that, but it's there. And quite obviously, it's Trump who did this, and he can deny it all he wants. So when the Wall Street Journal publishes this, of course, he comes out with this huge, huge lawsuit, as he did with NBC, as he's done with CBS, as he's done with other market entities, and they capitulate. NBC paid off the White House. They did an out-of-court settlement for millions and millions of dollars. CBS, the same sort of thing, with their 60-minute accusations, that they had doctored an interview with Kamala Harris. And by the way, CBS is complicit once again, because let's call a spade here. Their desire to try to get the White House stamp of approval on this huge media merger led to the firing of Stephen Colbert, because he was one of the harshest critics, one of the most effective critics of the Trump administration. So they blew him out the door. The number one rated show in talk radio, he's gone, simply because they're trying to kiss the butt of the guy in the White House. So that's what's happening here, okay? It's got nothing to do with Epstein. That may have been the basis for some of the misinformation that's going out there, but the overriding problem here is the way that the media has just laid down and died for Donald Trump, probably out of fear, probably because they don't want to make big payouts. But they used to fight this sort of thing. And there used to be a concerted effort by the media to basically stand by their constitutional right for freedom of the press. And that seems to have gone by the wayside these days, simply because of some of the allegations that come out of the White House. But this weapons of mass distraction that are going on, it's playing itself out here with the Epstein situation. And as soon as the heat gets turned on to Trump, what they do is they try to change the channel. Look over here. Don't listen to what their people are saying about this. Watch over here. And part of that, in the last couple of days, in a rather bizarre turn of events, is the accusation that former President Barack Obama is responsible for a lot of this, that he doctored information that went into the Mueller report, that he and Bill Clinton were the ones that actually made these accusations and polished false information about the Epstein-Trump relationship. It's all Barack Obama's fault. And of course, the Attorney General, Gabbard, who's now saying that they're launching an investigation into this, it's laughable, really, except that it's actually happening. And this is, again, part of the manipulation that's going on here. And we need to see through this and understand exactly what's being played out here. Gabbard, by the way, of course, has already been identified by intelligence agencies on the border, and especially down in the States and in Washington, as somebody who has very strong ties to Russian intelligence. She's But, that's not a big deal in the White House because obviously Trump has ties to Russian intelligence, too. We know that, notwithstanding his denials. But the fact that Obama is they say, going to be prosecuted for this is ridiculous. It's not going to happen, except for the fact that, let's face it, the sycophants on the Supreme Court that Trump has put there, you never know how they're going to react to this. Except there's something that intrigues me about the whole Obama twist to these accusations, that he is behind this, and that Galbert and Trump are both talking about possible prosecution of the former president. Just think about that for a second. The Supreme Court some time ago, did they not rule that presidents could not be prosecuted for something that they did while they were in office? That was the essence of the decision, wasn't it? Which basically said that, Merrick Garland, who was the attorney general at the time, could not proceed with a lot of the charges against then citizen Donald Trump because they were alleged to have happened while he was the president. And you can't touch the president when that's happening. Well, if that's true, and I still think that's a pretty tenuous decision by the court, but, anything to back up Trump. What's good for Trump should be good for other former presidents, too. So if that's the case, then Obama can't be prosecuted for anything while he was in office. So why are they even doing this? The answer is simple, because they want you to look at that instead of what's really going on. They don't want you to think about how the American economy is starting to show cracks and fissures, that the numbers are there that indicate that a lot of the stuff that Trump is doing economically are having a detrimental effect to the American businesses, to the industries there, job losses that are happening. And on it goes. And of course, some of the other things that are happening with the Trump White House when it comes to international policies. They don't want you to concentrate on that. They don't want the media to concentrate on that, and they sure don't want the media to report that. So they throw these trial balloons out. It's like, I don't want to get too deep into the military because I'm hardly an expert on this, but, when the missiles are being fired at missiles at fighter pilots, they put out stuff that they basically is going to, detract the missile. They're going to go and fire over there to something that they put out there that's going to be a kind of a false target, so that the missile doesn't get hit. Well, that's what the Trump administration is doing. They're throwing all this extraneous, irrelevant material out there about Obama, about Epstein, about whoever it might be. And basically, they're hoping to distract us so that we don't pay attention to the real issues. Now, thankfully, notwithstanding the capitulation of the NBCs and the CBSs and others, there are still some journalists who are trying to do their job properly. But they're being targeted. Trump is one of them, obviously. He's the head of the organization here. Stephen Colbert is a victim of this. Not a journalist, I get it, but a satirist and somebody who was basically trying to get the message across that we had to be paying attention to this. Others have done this. On the radio show a few years ago, a guest that I had on a pretty regular basis, Brian Karem, who's been in the White House press corps for years and years, wrote a book. Where's the copy of it here? This is called Free the Press, and it's called The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It. Now, Brian talked about this as a member of the press. He'd been booted out of the White House press corps a couple of times, I guess, during the first Trump administration, for basically standing up and asking the tough questions. One of them being, of course, if you lose the election, you're going to give up office. Well, we saw what happened on January 6th. So the answer was, yeah, he's going to make a big shitstorm about that, and he did. But Karem's been booted out. He's back in there now in various forms. He's got his own podcast. Brian's a very insightful guy and a hardworking journalist. There are others that are trying to do this too, but they're doing it with this overview of the George Stephanopoulos and other journalists who are trying to probe and trying to get to the truth, that are basically being left out to dry by their media bosses. And it's very, very difficult to try to get that message across. And that's exactly what the Trump administration is trying to do. They're trying to discredit the people that are doing the good work to try to bring the truth out there. And it's a very disheartening scenario to see played out time and time again. And you'd like to think, we've seen movies and seen books that have been written about these sorts of things, about some brave soul who's going to fight against tyranny and bring the truth out there. And at the end of the day, everybody understands it. They say, hey, we've been duped and we can move forward now, get rid of these insurrectionists and these bad guys. I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel just yet. And I'm not trying to paint a bleak picture here, but I mean, we have to understand the reality in which we're living. These guys have a developed strategy to try to discredit anybody who tries to criticize them, and at the same time misrepresent facts. And as long as they're members of a cult, whether it's Fox News, whether it's any of the other entities that are supporters of the Trump cult, there's always going to be that strong message where people are simply going to believe it because they heard it on Fox, or they heard it from Trump, or they heard it from Hoaxed or the ambassador to this country. They don't need to ask questions. They don't need to say, well, wait a second, show me why that's happening, or show me why you think that's true. They don't ask those questions anymore. And that's a very dangerous position that we find ourselves in these days, where we simply obey and capitulate without any question at all. And that's not the way a democracy is supposed to work, but it's the way that the Trump administration has tried to manipulate their position and to destroy what's happening. And this is not just speculation. This is happening time and time again. And it's going on now. Forget about the Obama thing. It's ridiculous. It's totally irreverent and irrelevant, too, for that matter. And the other things that are being thrown up there now try to distract us. We've got a problem here with a guy who simply doesn't seem to have a handle on what's going on. He's dragging NATO down. He's dragging the G7 down. It's having a terrible impact on the Canadian economy, and it's having a terrible impact on the American economy. You have insurrections that are happening all over the place right now. You've got protests that are happening in American cities. You've got workers that are complaining about what's happening. But that's white noise compared to what Trump wants us to start to listen to and to pay attention to. Now, his vision, I saw the statement just the other day that, he's 6 months into his second term here. He says his ratings, his popularity and support ratings are higher than they've ever been. They're low. They're down below 30%. Those are the numbers. But if he says differently, there are far too many people down in the States who simply listen to what he says and say, well, he's right, they're wrong, simply because it's him that says it. It's a very, very difficult situation that we're in right now. So, people like Brian Karem that write books about this, we have to understand that, yes, Trump is a major problem and a very, very consequential problem, because if we don't do as a society something about leaders like him, and he's not the only one. We have wannabes on this side of the border politically, too, that come to mind, Poilievre being one, and there are others that would love to emulate Trump and bring that sort of rationale, such as it is, to Canadian politics, too, and we simply can't let that happen. But the more important aspect here that we need to focus on here is the way the media is responding, or sadly not responding, to these sorts of things. Their American Constitution and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms talks about freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Those shouldn't just be catchphrases. They should be tenets for us to live by. And that means that there's a responsibility for journalists, for people that own those entities, newspapers, television, radio, and for podcasters, frankly, to speak truth to power and simply not give in to the speculation and to the sycophancy that goes on with some political leaders. And right now, well, the essence is we should be and can be doing a much better job of that. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. Thanks for joining us on whichever platform that you pick up your podcasts, on YouTube, Substack, Spotify, Blue Sky, getting a lot of response on Blue Sky. Thank you so much for this, wherever you get your podcasts. And by the way, if you're on YouTube, don't forget to hit the notification bell, too, and spread the word to others. We want to get the dialogue going. We need to have some conversations here. If the leadership is not coming from our leaders in various capacities in government, then it's up to us to develop this grassroots feeling that we have to be the ones that speak truth, and we have to be the ones that create the dialogue that's going back and forth. All right, information and intelligence is key to this, and information is power. And governments, sadly, these days are trying to control that information, and we simply can't allow that to happen. So let's do our part in this whole situation. And we'll continue to do that on this podcast, too, in the weeks and months and years ahead. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.